Last week, I talked about the rough and ready basics of deed polls, what they are, what they mean, the legalities and how to complete the forms. Today, let's talk about something that most legal guides completely ignore, the practical reality of changing your name as a trans-spectrum person in the UK. Hi, I'm Arya, and I'm a trans-femme legal professional and academic lawyer based in the UK. Last week, I released a practical guide to executing a deed poll for everybody. But today I want to speak directly to my trans siblings and our NB cousins, because as we're all aware, we sort of live in a bit of a twilight zone, a world that looks a lot like everyone else's, but every so often we encounter something unusual they can't relate to. Because while cis people change names and move on, we're navigating a system that wasn't built with us in mind. I'm going to cover your legal rights, but also the stuff that nobody warns you about, like why your bank might give you hassle or how to handle that awkward conversation with HR. I'm not going to go over the paperwork again because that video is already on the channel, and if you haven't seen it yet, I apologise, it's a bit dry. If legal paperwork was fun, you'd do it at Alton Towers. If you're at the beginning of your transition journey, or if you've got everything nailed and just want specific advice, I've got you covered. You're going to find timestamps in the description if you want to skip around for various pieces of information, and at the start of each section, I'll try and call out the specific members of our community that section applies to. The chapters are clearly labelled, so you can always jump straight to the information that you need. I know this video is long, and your time is valuable. Take what you need, I won't be offended. As always, everything contained in this video is for educational purposes only, and shouldn't be construed as professional or personalised legal advice. Now I'm going to start by addressing our new friends, the ones who are still questioning and still trying to figure out their gender identity, or the ones that have found it and are doing the same thing that we all did, desperately searching the internet to try and learn as much as we can to validate ourselves. Stop. You're already valid. The reason I'm wandering into this aside is because I know that you're in the stage where you want information right now, as much as you can get. But you're also probably feeling a little scared and don't know who you can trust. There's an old parable, I don't know if it comes from the Bible or somewhere else in literature, but it goes a little something like this. There's a group of villagers gathered at the local tavern, and early in the night, a young man announces that tomorrow he's going to walk the forbidden path out of the village. The older men in the village quickly gather round to tell him why he shouldn't do that. The road is bumpy, dangerous, full of potholes. There's a bridge that might collapse or maybe even monsters. He should take the safer road that everyone else uses. The younger man quickly starts to lose his nerve, because he wants to see what's on the road outside the village, but he doesn't want to fall through a bridge or get eaten by monsters. And after about an hour of this, he's ready to give up. At that point, the village elder stands up. He's old and he's withered, but everyone respects him. He approaches the young man and says, "I have walked that path before, many times. I know the dangers and I know how to avoid them. If you wish to walk this path tomorrow, I will walk alongside you and keep you safe." Basically, I just called myself an old man. That's awkward. Like the old man, I have walked this path though, and I've shown others the path. But you don't know me, and you've got no reason to trust and respect me. So I'm going to tell you my story and not just rattle off regurgitated things from the internet. Now the story's long, but I encourage you to stick around because it might help you. I knew that I was trans when I was about 10 or 11 years old, way back in the mid-90s. The world, as I'm sure people who are my age can attest in the comments, was a very different place in those days. And as much as I loved and still love sports and professional wrestling and action movies and a bunch of traditionally masculine things, I never really felt as though I could identify with the boys around me. They all wanted to fight and shout, and I wanted to sit quietly and read. As they were going through a sexual awakening and going girl crazy, even the ones who do it performatively and later come out as gay, I was discovering girls in a very different way. I could relate to the girls in my class more than the boys. I didn't want to be Mike Tyson or Arnold Schwarzenegger or Eric Cantona. I wanted to be the Pink Power Ranger or Kelly Kapowski or, a little bit later, Joey Potter. I liked that we could have honest conversations, free of bravado and full of emotions. But when puberty hit, I grew envious of the girls. I wanted to be pretty and curvy and not a mess of bad smells and body hair. I wanted to have access to a wide selection of gorgeous clothes that aren't just various boring combinations of shirts and trousers. But I also became aware that I wasn't entirely like the boys or the girls. See, my sexual awakening wasn't boobs and bums, it wasn't cocks and balls, it was learning that I was attracted to intellect and emotions, the person that can make you laugh. Unfortunately, in this era before everyone had the internet in their pockets and representation was common on TV, I didn't have access to the language I needed or the information I needed to get that language. Unlike these days where you can vaguely describe a feeling to Google and it will help you out. To get information in the mid-90s, you'd have to go to a library and look for a book on the topic, one that may not even exist. And likely, horrifyingly, you'd even have to ask someone. And you can't ask someone for information on something you don't know the name of. So, as was the style of the time, I shoved it way down and acted super masculine and became what was at that time the worst version of myself. At that time in school, you couldn't just be perceived as gay. You gotta remember, the AIDS crisis was still very recent, and being in any way queer had some serious social implications. You also have to remember at this time, where there was almost zero positive representation of trans people. If you're a doom scroller, search up an episode of Jerry Springer featuring any trans woman. That was what people knew about our community from the media. Representation is important because it gives people the language to describe things and find themselves. I can vividly remember the first time I saw positive trans representation on TV. Like, it's a core memory for me. I'd have been about 14 or 15 at the time. I was a huge fan of the TV show Ally McBeal, and I still am. I didn't just love Ally McBeal, I wanted to be Ally McBeal. I still do, and I'm almost there. But the show featured the first positive representation of a trans woman that I ever saw. There's a character called Cindy McAuliffe, played masterfully by the wonderful Lisa Edelstein, who you probably know nowadays from being Dr. Cuddy on House. Cindy wasn't a main character, but she was a recurring guest star, the current girlfriend of one of the show's main characters. And yes, the way that she was portrayed wouldn't pass a PC check today, but for the time it was a revelation. Sure, the other characters made jokes about their friend dating a dude and he had a few internal struggles, but ultimately he didn't care. Not only was she a fierce, funny, confident, well-rounded character played with this real sense of emotional depth and honesty, but Mark, a cisgender heterosexual male, he didn't care because he loved her. Someone who represented how I felt was on my TV, and she was happy and someone loved her. Better yet, legal and personal issues, for her, were treated respectfully by the show. The characters that were awful to her were awful to everyone, and the ones who grew to love and respect her went on individual journeys to understand and accept her. I actually talked about this on Twitter once, and Lisa responded with some really nice insights. Seriously, you should look into her when you get a chance. She's been an ally publicly since at least the late 80s. Unfortunately, this was the eye of the storm, because it would be replaced on my TV almost immediately afterwards by characters on Friends making jokes about Chandler kissing a man, and more Jerry Springer. So, again, I shoved the feelings down and got on with pretending to be manly and became an even worse version of myself. I did all the things that you were supposed to do. I went to university, I got a manly career as a professional athlete, I got a girlfriend, we had kids. admittedly aren't supposed to do all of these things before you turn 20, but life's the ultimate university. All the while, I was holding on to this secret that was eating me alive from somewhere deep, deep inside my soul. Now, had this been 15 years later when the world had moved on, I'd probably have come out. And actually, just a few years later, my brother came out as trans when I was in my mid-20s, but it was too late for me by then. And not too late like there's a time limit on transition. I don't want to give you that impression. Too late for me based on where I was emotionally at the time. You see, by that stage, I was drinking and abusing various substances like they were a life raft, desperately hoping that the next drink or the next joint would finally shut the woman screaming inside of me up. It cost me my career, my relationship, my children. I struggled to hold on to a job, but the solution was going to be at the bottom of the next bottle, right? On April 29th, 2012, just a few weeks after my 27th birthday, my alcoholism had got so bad that it almost killed me. I woke up one morning after a 3-day bender, non-stop drinking, and I still don't know all of the details, but long story short, I went to a gig with some friends, they went home, I didn't, mistakes were made, and by day 3, I was in front of a doctor with early signs of kidney failure. In an attempt to kill her, I'd almost taken myself. The very next day, I entered a 12-step program, and I'm proud to be able to say that I haven't touched a single drink in the 13 years since. Eliminating my biggest problem, the alcohol, enabled me to access the tools to focus on my other problems. I became reliable enough to hold down a job, to be around my children again, to be a good friend, to be around for my family in general. I literally, though, had to learn to tackle life on life's terms again. But with the alcohol and the substances gone, that little voice from deep inside me returned. It started out as a whisper, and it slowly got louder. And I'll admit that I was terrified of her. I did a few things that I really regret whilst trying to ignore her. Some of it was still truly toxic behaviour. But the worst thing I did was letting my little brother go down the forbidden path without me walking alongside him. Letting him go alone as the canary in the coal mine. Once I got my life back on track, I decided to finally pursue that teenage dream. Not of being Ally McBeal, because that was too honest for me at the time, but of wanting to be a lawyer. Now, I wasn't the best student, even as a teenager, and my substance problems started way before adulthood. And I hadn't been in education for well over a decade at this point. But I decided, you know what? Screw it. I was going to chase my dreams. In the spring of 2016, I started to toy with the idea of enrolling in the law program at the Open University. My ex-partner, who was the mother of my children and had become by this point my best friend, went out of her way to encourage me. She didn't force me, she didn't kick me out of the plane, but every so often she'd essentially say, "The door's open and you're wearing a parachute, what are you waiting for?" By May, I'd signed up, and by August, I was taking classes. And on September 12th, all of a sudden, she was dead. The mother of my children, my best friend, died. She was 30 years old. I'd literally spoken to her an hour before it happened. The old me would have been into a bottle of vodka before I even started to process my feelings. But sober, I was able to think about it more. I wanted this degree. I wanted it for me. She wanted it for me. I couldn't let her down, and I wouldn't let her down. After I completed my first year with the Open University, I decided to make the switch to a real university. One with a physical campus and other students, so I made the switch to Oxford Brookes. I applied, I got accepted, but as if it was a sign, more tragedy followed. My uncle, who I was really close to, died suddenly, right in front of me. He was 50 years old. 3 days after that, a close friend of myself and my ex also died suddenly. He was 34. I was broken, as you can imagine. But I knew enough to know that alcohol wasn't going to solve this problem for me. I had to rely on friends and family to drag me through it. And remember, I still owed my ex a degree. I had to start university in the autumn of 2017, just weeks after losing two of the most important people in my life. I had to regather and reflect quickly, and you know what I learned? It's a real cliche, but life is too short. And that became something of a mantra for me. My first year at university, I threw myself into work and studying. I started my first YouTube channel. I know now, and probably did at the time, that I was keeping busy to keep my mind from wandering between grief and that voice in my head, but eventually busy becomes normal. Those things you hide the most will always fight to the surface. In my second year at university, which was 2018, I decided to commit to my mantra of life being too short. I decided to address the voice in my head, her voice. Not by talking to myself, because that's never a good sign, but by listening to her. And I went down this rabbit hole of research. Is this normal? What do I do about it? How do I do this, that, the other? I started to experiment with my gender identity and expression in private, and it felt right. So my next step was to find someone else to talk to. I had a really close friend at the time, Tori, who was the manager of my halls of residence. She'd noticed and commented on the massive amount of parcels that I'd been receiving. Coming out was the best way to explain myself. Now, Tori is awesome. Aside from being just a generally great person, she's also a mental health first aider. She listened and helped me figure things out and encouraged me and made sure I didn't feel like a freak. I started to be myself outside of my room and around halls at least. Eventually I told other friends. I was careful at first. I only told queer female friends. Then I told straight female friends. Then I slowly opened up to everybody. I started to express myself on campus and in social settings, and I got comfortable being myself. Next, I told my family. Now, I was in a very privileged position in some respects. My mum and my stepfather had both been through this before, right? The canary in the coal mine. I knew they were safe. I knew my siblings were safe. But I come from a splintered family. I'm the only child of my mother and father, and I have half-siblings on both sides. My father is someone I've always had a difficult relationship with. He wasn't really around a lot when I was a child. I didn't grow up with him as a constant presence, and it's only really in the last 10 years or so that we've built a real relationship. He's also quite traditional. It's not necessarily that he's bigoted, but he's a product of his time and his upbringing. Having a queer kid isn't in his wheelhouse, and having a trans kid is so far out of his spectrum of knowledge that it might as well be quantum physics. But he didn't kill me. He immediately said that he knew he'd get things wrong, and to bear with him, and he'd learn. And he is, slowly. I'm very blessed as well that my stepmom is incredibly open-minded, and as a primary school teacher has the patience of a saint. If he's struggling, she can help him. Hell, I've never done it, but if I asked her to help me, she'd do it. I could literally call her right now and say, hey, I need to buy a bra, I have no idea what I'm doing, and she'd be at a shop with me, no questions asked. Eventually, I started figuring things out. I started to socially transition at university. I graduated twice. When I eventually started my professional career, I was able to do it as myself with my name and my gender identity and expression. And I found happiness. Today, I am Arya to everyone in my life. I have good friends, a great relationship with my family. My 19-year-old daughter is an active part of my life. I'm still sober, and I'm still me. So if you're wondering if you can trust me, I want you to bear in mind that I just told you my life story. I laid bare my struggle, my pain, my trauma, and my survival on the internet for the entire world to see. I gave you some of the most private parts of myself for free. I laid down my sword and shield. I offer my story not out of vanity, but out of love and understanding and the hope that there was something in there that maybe you could identify with. But most importantly, I hope that you now understand that when I say, I have walked that forbidden path and I can show you the way, let me walk with you, I mean it. Now, let's bring a few of the others back into the room, shall we? For those of you who are in the early stages of your journey, or perhaps a little further along, you're probably going to be wondering when the right time to change your name is. Do you do it before, during, or after social transition? Let's start with something that's incredibly important for you to know. There is no legal requirement that you change your name. For all intents and purposes, until you formalize it, your chosen name is no different to a nickname or a stage name. Elton John, as far as I know, was still legally Reg Dwight well up into the 90s. And we all had nicknames at some stage in our life, right? You can change your name on social media at any time as well. The time to formalize your name change is when you start thinking about the Gender Recognition Certificate, or GRC. It's because the law requires you to prove that you've been living in your acquired gender for 2 years, and the fastest way of doing that is by presenting legal documentation, a deed poll, bills, bank statements, passport, driving license, etc. And again, you aren't legally required to apply for a GRC. If you just want to change your name and never apply, that's fine. Your identity is still valid. Make the choices that are right for you. Obviously, social and legal transition are two very different topics. But social always comes before legal. So I'm going to run you through some things that you might want to consider with your timing. If you're still at that questioning stage, start by exploring your feelings about your identity and presentation. At the risk of sounding like the GRC panel, ask yourself, are you sure? Not to talk yourself out of it, but because it's possible to almost will yourself into a decision that isn't right. I'm sure a lot of NBs and gender fluid people have stories of exploring their feelings and maybe pushing too far towards the other end, or trying to force themselves to the other end when they aren't feeling it, and you're welcome to share those in the comments below or on my Discord. When you've figured out where you are on the spectrum, that's the time to start considering your name. I'll talk very generally about how to choose your name in a separate section, but we'll talk timing for now. My opinion is that when you start feeling like you're coming into land from the questioning stage, and perhaps ready to start expressing yourself more openly in public, start compiling your list of names that you like. Start small and private and test them out. Talk to your favorite generative AI, maybe ChatGPT or Gemini, and ask them to address you by the name you're testing out. They're smart enough now to simulate a conversation. See how your name feels to your ears from their virtual mouth. Next, slowly expand. Maybe ask your best friend or closest family member to start using the name you like best. Explain that you're just testing it out and want to try it on. They'll slip up and they might even have opinions on it, but it's a nice way to be in a safe space with an actual human to try it out. Once you're comfortable with a name and starting to express your true gender identity in public, even if you aren't passing, start introducing yourself to people exclusively by your chosen name. Normalize it in your own life. At that point, once you're comfortable with how your social transition is going, you're probably already thinking about next steps. A deed poll is the natural next step on this road. Okay, so this section and everything beyond this is for everyone, so welcome back. When you're ready and comfortable in your social transition, you're going to want to begin the process of beginning your professional transition. Depending on where you work and who you work with, this could go any number of ways, so I'm going to keep it generalized. tell your boss, and if you've got one, your HR manager in private first. If you're working for a big company, they probably already have an employee handbook with a step-by-step guide for handling this, or if not, be prepared to answer a lot of questions. Don't be defensive, and they'll let you guide them as to what happens next. Common questions you'll hear will include your new name, pronouns. They might ask if you'd like them to tell your colleagues or if you'd prefer to do it. They'll then probably go through any uniform considerations depending on the environment you work in. I'll talk more in a future video about social transition at work, the appropriate clothing, how to deal with clients, etc. But for now, we're just going to keep it to names and legal considerations. Unfortunately, it's not improbable that you might encounter situations of discrimination in the workplace. So I'm just going to do a really quick primer on discrimination law, particularly the Equality Act and how it might apply to and protect you in the workplace. I'm aware there are controversies around this. I'm not going to fully address those in this video because it's ongoing, it's still a developing situation, and when the time's right, it will need a thorough deep dive, and I'll go through it and I'll do that. So that will be a future video. This is merely an overview, but if you want to ask any questions in the comments or on Discord, I'll address them to the best of my ability. The Equality Act lists 8 protected characteristics, and it's my estimation there are likely 3 that will directly affect you as a member of the transgender community, including NBs, in the workplace. The most obvious is gender reassignment, which reads as follows. 1. A person has the protected characteristic of gender reassignment if the person is proposing to undergo, is undergoing, or has undergone a process or part of a process for the purpose of reassigning the person's sex by changing physiological or other attributes of sex. 2. A reference to a transsexual person is a reference to a person who has the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. 3. In relation to the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, A reference to a person who has a particular protected characteristic is a reference to a transsexual person. B, a reference to persons who share a protected characteristic is a reference to transsexual persons. Now, obviously, this law is problematic in terms of some of the language it uses. The term transsexual is very outdated. Some people still use it, but it's uncommon these days. But that first clause is often the one that people misunderstand. In the simplest of terms, if you are at any phase in your transition, it doesn't matter if you're just coming out, changing names and pronouns, changing your outward gender presentation, or undergoing medical treatment, or even if you've completed the entire process, you are protected from discrimination by the law. This can be understood to include, until someone rules otherwise, being transgender, non-binary, and even agender, or anything on that spectrum. You cannot be refused employment, promotions, or any other considerations at work because you're trans. In very practical terms, if your employer is unwilling to accommodate you in your transition, or worse, actively opposes it, you can take legal action against discrimination. The next is sexual orientation, which the Act defines as follows. 1. Sexual orientation means a person's sexual orientation towards A. persons of the same sex, B. persons of the opposite sex, or C. persons of either sex. 2. In relation to the protected characteristic of sexual orientation, A. a reference to a person who has a particular protected characteristic is a reference to a person who is of a particular sexual orientation, and B, a reference to persons who share a protected characteristic is a reference to persons who are of the same sexual orientation. Now, as written, the law states that if you're gay, straight, or bisexual, you're protected. This isn't an absolute, because these provisions as they stand would be understood to protect you if you're pansexual, asexual, any other sexual orientation. And finally, sex. Now, I'm very aware of the Supreme Court ruling, and as I said, I will deep dive that when the time is right. It's currently being appealed up to the European Court, and until that's happened, I don't want to try and clarify too much because it's changing. But for now, let's go through the language in the law together just before we discuss it in brief. So sex is A reference to a person who has a particular protected characteristic. It's a reference to a man or a woman. B, a reference to persons who share a protected characteristic is a reference to persons of the same sex. Very simply, as currently clarified by the Supreme Court at this time in the summer of 2025, if you are assigned male at birth, the law considers you male. If you were assigned female at birth, the law considers you female. When I started doing queer legal research in 2018, this was actually very much the assumed position by academics, scholars, legal professionals. It was never considered that you could make a solid legal argument that if you had been discriminated against for being a trans woman, you could claim discrimination for being discriminated against as a woman. Now, we can argue the morals of this forever, and legal scholars certainly will. But the Supreme Court clarification wasn't news to lawyers. It was always what we had worked to the assumption of, because the law, if there's ever any doubt about the meaning of a word, always reverts to the dictionary definition. In the so-called culture wars, nobody won or lost. The Supreme Court decision changed absolutely nothing in law. It would have been a far bigger story if they'd made any alternate ruling. That doesn't mean that you can't be trans and discriminated against on the basis of sex. If you're a trans man and someone in your workplace starts making derogatory comments in reference to you about, for example, menstruation or pregnancy or anything else that's typically a biologically female concept, you are protected under the law, and the reverse is also true. If you suspect that you are being discriminated against in the workplace, your first port of call should always be to HR to see if you can resolve things. If they can't resolve things, and always remember that HR exists to protect the employer, not the employee, you should immediately contact ACAS, who are there to help resolve workplace issues, or an employment solicitor. I'll leave a link to ACAS in the description. If you're considering medical transition, before you even enter the legal name change process, I recommend that you talk to your doctor or self-refer to your local NHS gender clinic if you haven't already done so. And I don't mean eventually, I mean right now. Like, pause this video, make the call, go to the website, fill in the form, get it done. You're not committing to anything by doing this, but the waiting list for these clinics, as I speak right now, is years long. I'm currently on the waiting list for London, and I've seen estimations that the current waiting list could be as long as 25 years. Although your local clinic, it might be shorter. I know Cardiff is currently working at about 9 months to a year, but you have to live in Wales to access Cardiff. So get on that list now. You've got plenty of time to change your mind. If you're already in that system, or even if you just have a GP, which I imagine you probably do, you should submit your completed deed poll to them as soon as you've completed it. They can change the name that you are known by on the system locally without it, but they can't update your actual records with the national system. The next question is this. If you're changing your name by deed poll, in what order should you change your documents? Now, I recommend doing this strategically. I'd suggest the first documents you change should be, in this order, your passport, your driving license, and your bank account. This is why. Your bank is going to give you problems with accepting a deed poll, especially if it's unenrolled. The passport office and DVLA won't. Banks and other institutions thereafter, including your employer, won't argue with a deed poll that can be supported by government issue ID. Think of it as kind of a game of top trumps, or the old schoolyard favourite, my dad is bigger than your dad. Your bank and other institutions will argue with you, but they won't argue with the government, or at least not about you anyway. During transition, you will have mismatched documents. It's just a natural consequence of bureaucracy. A deed poll takes immediate effect, a new driving license takes a couple of weeks, a passport can take anywhere between 2 hours and 3 months. Until you've changed all of your documentation, it's quite sensible to keep a photocopy of your deed poll with every important document. That way, if there's a mismatch, you've got evidence to show everybody you're in the process of changing your name and updating your documents. Everybody knows that you'll wait ages for a new passport in the summer. It used to be one of those annual reports that the media would churn out on slow news days every year. As always, though, remember you're dealing with tired administrators who are following orders. If you've ever worked, you can empathize, a word I can never say, with this, because their boss is driving them mental. They've got a billion things to do inside and outside of work, and you are just another task to them. You're not special to them, I'm sorry. They'll stick to policies to the letter until challenged because they don't want to lose their job. And they'll escalate it if you need them to. Calmly ask for a manager, explain that you have a legal deed poll, and if you exhaust all options, either ask me in the comments or on my Discord or seek legal representation. This can also be a form of discrimination. But in most situations, you can avoid them entirely by just obtaining a passport in your chosen name before you do anything else. Talking of passports, let's switch our attention to travelling. You can apply for a passport in your new name as soon as you've executed a deed poll, simply by filling the appropriate passport application for a change of name and providing a copy of your deed poll to evidence this change. You cannot change the gender marker on your passport until you have a GRC. And if you're not already into that process, the clock may be ticking on that advice. As a community, we live in legally and politically unstable times. Neither I nor anyone else knows if that's going to be made easier or, unfortunately, much more likely made impossible in the near future. At a UK border, unless the name you have chosen is very incongruous with your appearance, nobody at passport control is likely to bat an eyelid. They literally just want to know if the passport is valid and that your picture matches your face. I cannot comprehensively cover all of the possibilities that might happen if you're travelling overseas, because there are 195 countries in the world, all with different laws. I strongly recommend checking local laws before travelling anywhere. The Foreign Office tends to have a fairly well updated list of where and when things are acceptable. But always check those laws, even when you're travelling to countries that you consider safe or have travelled to pre-transition. Not only is your safety and your freedom on the line, but it will allow you to make some preparations for what to expect on arrival. Also, again, not legal advice, but general advice. When you travel through an airport, particularly the scanners at an airport, be prepared to be pulled from line, depending on where you are in your transition. It's not personal, it's just a technological limitation. If you've started estrogen having been assigned male at birth, and your passport marks you as male, those boobs that you've grown to love, or, if you're a trans male who hasn't had top surgery yet, the ones you've grown to hate, they will show up as an unexpected object on the scanner. It's very annoying, but airport security staff are more understanding than you think. Very politely, without needing to draw attention to yourself or raising your voice, just calmly explain the situation. Is it awkward? Absolutely. But it happens literally every single day. Not for you, but I promise you it's a situation they encounter every single day. There are more of us than you think. At the end of the day, the scanner doesn't know if it's a chicken fillet or an explosive. That's why we keep humans at security, for the safety of everyone. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't caution you on the possibilities of problems with changing your documents. and I already sort of touched on this on the previous video. Whilst a deed poll in any form is a legally valid document as long as it's been executed correctly, there are some occasions when it can be refused. Some organisations might want additional documentary evidence before changing records, which is why you should change your passport first. If your deed poll records don't match what they have on the system or contain errors, they may refuse them. This could be as simple as misspelling a name, or because you've left an account in your maiden name, got married and changed everything. This isn't unreasonable at all. If your name isn't used for all purposes across all government records, it may be refused elsewhere. This is very, very easily avoided by just making a checklist and changing everything, especially those first 3 things I mentioned, within a week or 2 of executing your deed poll. If your name change is deemed by someone to be an attempt to commit fraud or impersonate someone, like I said in the previous video about not everyone can be Taylor Swift, right? It might be refused. And likewise, if your name is deemed offensive, for example, if you decide to call yourself Adolf Hitler, like I mentioned in the last video. But I think we should discuss name changes in general, because we've got some unique habits as a community when we change names, and we're going to have to look a little deeper into what you can and cannot do, as well as some of the implications of them. First of all, when choosing a name, you need to seriously consider what your transition goals are. If your goal, as it is with most of us, is to pass or to have an easy life, you want to choose a name that raises as few questions as possible. When you're set on our list of names, think about the image of the person that each name conjures in your head. Does the image that gives you vaguely fit someone like you? I'm being as delicate as possible here, but as members of the trans community, we're very prone to selecting names based on our cultural heroes or favourite characters from the media, and there's nothing wrong with that in the slightest. Help, I did it in part. My brother Sam is born from his Supernatural fandom. But if you look like me, milky white to the point of translucence, and I've got a couple of lights helping me out, plus I think I went outside briefly earlier, you should perhaps think twice about calling yourself Shaniqua or Akira or Hassan. Think about how common that name is in your culture and your country and your ethnic background in general. I'm not suggesting we should all be John or Jane Smith, but if I'm trying to pass and I'm scheduled to meet with someone expecting Yume Kakuta, even if that is your legal name, that's going to raise questions and cause trust issues. I can't convincingly create a Japanese parent in the moment, and I don't speak Japanese. I'm not saying that you can't use pop culture names, of course not, or that you have to be boring at all. In fact, I recommend that you put as much thought into your name as possible. In fact, I'll even tell you the story of how I chose my name. So, as you all know at this point, I settled on the name Aria. It was during the pandemic, and with nothing else to do, I was binge-watching TV. Now, a TV show I love is Pretty Little Liars. And yes, I know it's not the greatest TV show ever, and the quality drops off after about season 4. That's irrelevant. But my favourite character in that show is Aria. But hang on, my thinking didn't end there. I decided to look into what the name means, because it's uncommon here in the UK. I was very conscious that I didn't want to be doing any untoward cultural appropriation. In my research, I learned that aria comes from Greek and means to sing. Now, for reasons that nobody knows, every woman in my family has a Greek name. Not the slightest hint of Greek ancestry, but it's an unexplained family tradition. Second, I love to sing, and I'm unironically not awful at it, so that was 2 boxes ticked. But then I learned that it means to sing in 6 different languages, and I, because I'm a nerd, just happen to speak 6 languages. It was kind of written in the stars. Suddenly, all the names I had on my shortlist didn't fit. And for the record, here are some of the names I considered and why I rejected them. I considered Daisy. I love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and she is the coolest character ever. But it also sounds like the name of a cow, and, well, I'm not skidding. Ali, of course, after my 90s mini-skirted legal hero. That one didn't last long because my sister is also called Ali, short for Alexandra, with a different spelling. I also considered Cindy from the same source for obvious reasons, but that was also the name of a knockoff Barbie doll when I was a kid. I considered Josephine. As I mentioned earlier, Joey Potter was one of my TV heroes as a teenager. I thought I'd tell people to call me Joey because, nothing complicated about being a trans girl borrowing a name from a tomboy character to use her masculine nickname. And no, if you watch my whole story earlier in the first part of this video, I didn't seriously consider Kelly because it's gender neutral, and I could have gone with Kimberly, but everyone always shortens it to the gender neutral Kim. My point is that if your goal is to pass without too much drama, choose a list of names that you could have realistically been given at birth based on your background and age. I mean this as gently as I can, my loves, but if you're in your 60s and you try and call yourself Chardonnay, it's not going to work. Because every girl who got named Chardonnay during that trend is about 12 now. And I'm going to end this section of the video on a pro tip. Once you've settled on your name, before you roll it out socially, and certainly before you fill it out on a deed poll, search it up in Google. I have one friend who put her name into Google at my suggestion while she was filling out her deed poll and found out that she shared it with a, how do I put this gently, adult entertainer? Quite a famous one. That's not what you want coming up when your next prospective employer inevitably looks you up, especially because she's a teacher. Another of my friends, who is a little younger than me, wanted to change her first name to Rose. But, pretty, right? Except her family name was West. And if you don't understand why that's a terrible decision, I invite you to search Rose West on Google or Bing. Actually, if you've got an Xbox, you should always use Bing. With their rewards program, I don't think I've paid for Game Pass in years. Finally, let me please reiterate a piece of advice that I gave you in that first video. I strongly recommend that you use an unenrolled deed poll if you're part of our community. Hiding your dead name isn't about shame, it's about safety. If you're lucky enough to pass well enough that nobody ever asks any questions, and that you don't feel the need to tell everyone that you're trans, probably the last thing you want is for someone to do a Google search, find out your past and potentially your address. Likewise, it's a dangerous world for our community in general right now. Even if you don't care who knows your dead name, you don't want them to be able to find your address. We've lost way too many of our siblings already, and none of us wants to go to another funeral or another vigil, because God knows I've been to far too many already. Anyway, this video has been really long, and I know some of you will have skipped through it, and some of you will have watched the entire thing, and either way, I'm really grateful to you for doing that. Just want to recap the key points quickly, just in case you've skipped through the video, there might be something you want to go back and watch. I've said that when you should choose your name is a personal choice, but be sensible with the timing. You should know your legal rights in the workplace, and don't be afraid to enforce them. Once you've completed your deed poll, change your passport first. Check local laws before you travel. Be patient with people in bureaucracy, because they are human beings. Choose your name carefully and always Google it before you legally change it. And for those who watch me tell my personal story in the first section of the video, remember this. Who you were yesterday isn't who you are today, and only you get to choose who you are tomorrow. We all have a past, we all have our secrets and our traumas, and we all have successes yet to come. Life is short though, so always live like there isn't a tomorrow. If you have questions or personal stories you'd like to share publicly, you can do it in the comments below. If you'd like to share them privately and wish to find a safe community of our people, there's also a link to my Discord. If you found something in this video helpful, please hit the like button to help the next person who needs this information to find it. My next video in this series is going to be about the steps to obtaining a gender recognition certificate. It should be out next week, but I'm also in the process of moving house and starting a new job, so please forgive me if there's a gap. I'm also slowly dropping videos with advice for incoming law students. Between this video and the first Deed Poll video, I've released one with 7 essential tips for first-year students. Even if you're not studying law, if you're heading for university, there are valuable things in there for you to know ahead of time, and if you want me to do a more trans or queer specific one, I'm much more than happy to do that as well. Again, let me know in the comments. If you'd like more legal videos on issues around the queer community or about being a student or practical queer advice, please hit the subscribe button. I'd love to have you as part of our community, both here and on the Discord. As I've said, I also take requests on both platforms. I don't make any guarantee of turnaround time, but if you've got a request and I can make a video out of it, I'm more than happy to do it. And if I can't, I'll just answer your question there and then. I hope to see you all very soon. In the meantime, I've been Arya. I love you all very much. Thank you for watching.